let's talk about countries taking on their own autonomy. You are on African soil, not for the first time, but this would be a good moment to ask about one of the countries that has taken its own autonomy, and that's Burkina Faso. Your remarks recently at the Senate seem to suggest that he's diverting, General Traore, is diverting its 4 billion gold reserves to sustain his military rule rather than for public welfare. These remarks sparked widespread condemnation across the continent. What did you mean by that statement?
U.S. General Langley landed in Kenya expecting applause, but left facing a storm and insults. General Langley, head of AFRICOM, was confronted by a bold African journalist who exposed something deeper than military talk. But how did he manage to answer her questions? Let's find out. The visit looked official. A high-profile security conference, handshakes, cameras, flags. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The welcome was polite, but not warm. The stage was set, but the energy was off. It wasn't about formality. It was about resentment. Not loud or chaotic, but quiet and cutting. Behind the speeches and security briefings, the continent was still reeling from something deeper. A single statement that revealed everything. Weeks earlier, the general had stood before his senators and accused a young African leader of misusing his country's gold. Not for development, not for his people, but to protect his junta. A loaded phrase, not just a criticism, but a judgment. Not just a policy note, but a verdict delivered from Washington. And that, more than anything, lit the fuse. In Burkina Faso, those words were heard like thunder. Crowds poured into the streets in anger. Flags waved not in celebration, but defiance. And across West Africa, in markets, mosques, studios, and schools, the message was debated, analyzed, and rejected not just because of what was said, but because of who dared to say it. Once again, an African decision, on gold, on security, on sovereignty, was being dissected in foreign chambers, under foreign lights, by a foreign voice. So when that same voice arrived in East Africa, it didn't land cleanly. The continent was still watching. The wounds were still fresh, and the irony was sharp. A general claiming to fight for Africa's stability had now become a symbol of its foreign dependency. This wasn't about one man or one country. This was about something larger, a continent demanding to choose its future without being corrected, scolded, or disciplined by outside powers. The days of soft-spoken submission are fading. In their place is something far more dangerous to the old world order: confidence. The general may have arrived to discuss security, but security wasn't the real subject anymore. The real question was power. Who holds it? Who speaks it? And who decides when it's used? His very presence forced those questions into the open, and nobody, not even he, could control how they would be answered. What was once viewed as a partnership now looked like oversight. What was once called cooperation now sounded like command. And the longer he stood under the lights, the more the gap widened between the words he came to speak and the truth the continent was already feeling. No one needed to yell. The silence said it all. Africa heard what was said in Washington. And now, face to face, it was ready to respond. Not with bullets or anger, but with the sharpest weapon of all: accountability. The storm had arrived, and the man at the center of it had only just begun to feel the lightning. General Langley had barely settled into his seat before the questions began slicing through diplomatic pleasantries. With his reputation already under fire across West Africa, he tried to do what military men rarely do in public: retreat. But unlike a battlefield maneuver, this retreat was verbal, and it only made things worse. As soon as the journalist pressed him on his Burkina Faso remarks, Langley shifted his tone. No longer was he speaking from a position of command. Now he was on the defensive, emphasizing that his comments were taken out of context. He insisted that he respected Burkina Faso's sovereignty. They make their decisions. That's their sovereign right, he repeated, almost like a protective charm against the storm. But the words didn't land, because sovereignty isn't respected through repetition. It's respected through restraint. And Langley had already crossed that line in Washington. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now.
Let me speak to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. They maintain their sovereignty. They make their decisions how they use their resources. They make their decisions who their resources go to for military support. That's their sovereign right. But my cautionary tale was just from a military perspective. That was a Senate Armed Services Committee asking me a direct question. Burkina Faso, a lot of great things going on to progress them forward, okay? But then when you look at the military part of it, knowing that that's the epicenter of global terrorism, it was my time to illuminate that this is probably their weakest point, and there needs to be sufficient resources going towards for the whole fight of terrorism in that country, period. They make their decisions though. That's their sovereignty, their sovereign right to make their decisions, what is appropriate, what's not. But I wanted to illuminate that it's going in the wrong direction now. ISIS is getting stronger. JNIM is getting stronger. Al-Qaeda in the lands of the Maghreb is getting stronger in that country.
Now, he tried to frame his remarks as purely military analysis, not political critique. He claimed his statement to the Senate was meant to illuminate security weaknesses, not to insult national governance. But the phrasing gave him away. Illuminate is a word used by those who believe their vantage point is higher. It suggests that Africans are in the dark and need a U.S. general to show them the way. Then came the pivot to data. Langley pointed to an increase in attacks by insurgent groups, particularly since 2022, when Traoré took power. He suggested a correlation: more autonomy, more insurgency. He stopped just short of blaming Traoré directly, but the insinuation was loud and clear. The problem with that argument is that it dangerously simplifies a brutal reality. Burkina Faso's insurgency didn't start with Traoré. It was inherited after years of foreign involvement, corruption, and failed military reforms, many of them shaped by external partners, including the United States.
And do you think it's getting stronger after General Traoré took over?
It has. Just look at the numbers of attacks. It really has, since 2022. I've been tracking this since I took command. So, no ill will towards him, but the decisions is their own. They're looking for other ways to be able to, they're still on warfighting footing, but it's just going to take more resources.
So you stand by that statement? Because there's been pressure on you to walk those statements back.
That's my statement, that's my assessment. That is getting worse. More needs to be done for not just local, but whole of country, because of these violent extremist organizations are seeking revenue, they're seeking resources, they're seeking recruiting from the Burkinabe people, and they're seeking refuge within their country. That threatens their sovereignty.
Langley's insistence on statistics, look at the number of attacks, was meant to establish authority, but it came across as cold, even callous. As if the suffering of Burkinabe civilians could be reduced to a chart, rather than a consequence of long-term instability and outside interference. His framing ignored the broader conversation Africans are now having. Who benefits when we surrender control in exchange for counterinsurgency aid? Even more telling was the way Langley subtly inserted America's interests into the equation. After stressing that Burkina Faso's instability threatens its sovereignty, he added, "And that threatens America's interests." That moment shifted the energy of the room. It was no longer just a conversation about African security. It was an admission that the U.S. views Africa not just as a partner, but as a strategic buffer zone. This is where Langley began to stumble. He was trying to walk back his earlier comments while making new ones that dug an even deeper trench. You cannot say, in the same breath, that you respect a nation's decisions and imply those decisions are endangering global stability. That's not respect. It's surveillance. Throughout the exchange, the journalist kept the pressure steady, never letting Langley slip into vague generalities. When asked if he stood by his controversial statement, Langley didn't blink. "That's my statement. That's my assessment." It was meant to sound firm. Instead, it confirmed what many feared. The general wasn't sorry for what he said. He was only sorry that Africans heard it. In trying to clarify, Langley had done the opposite. His attempts to reposition his remarks as tactical insight exposed the uncomfortable truth that AFRICOM's presence is still rooted in the belief that Africa's sovereignty is conditional. Conditional on cooperation, conditional on alignment, conditional on obedience.
And that threatens America's interest?
Say again?
Does that then threaten America's interests?
Yes, thank you for asking that. Because especially ISIS, and of course in East Africa is inextricably linked all the way to ISIS West Africa, ISIS Sahel. And there's going to be probably a move afoot for them to move and seek refuge within the line. So we have shared objectives, and we offer to work together with the Burkinabe government and border countries. Mali, Niger, coastal West Africa countries, collective, because here's what these organizations do. Here's what these terrorist organizations do. They seek refuge in the seams or the borders of these countries and lets them thrive and grow and lets them recruit, gain resources to carry on their illicit and nefarious activities against the populations of those people.
By this point in the interview, General Langley's attempt to walk back his Senate remarks had unraveled into something far more revealing. What began as a defense of AFRICOM's intentions quickly morphed into a confession. Sovereignty isn't the issue. Independent sovereignty is. When the journalist asked if the growing instability in Burkina Faso threatens American interests, Langley didn't hesitate. Yes. That single word shattered any illusion of neutrality. The conversation was no longer about Burkina Faso's internal struggles or the rise of insurgent cells. It was about America's stake in who governs, how they govern, and whether they choose the U.S. as a partner. And suddenly, Langley wasn't a general analyzing a battlefield. He was a gatekeeper admitting that African autonomy becomes a problem when it refuses to serve U.S. strategic goals. It's in this portion that the conversation shifts from awkward diplomacy to barely disguised imperial logic. Langley warns that insurgent groups are not just active in West Africa, but might relocate and seek refuge across borders, exploiting the cracks between nations. He outlines the U.S. vision of a collective regional security architecture, one where AFRICOM offers partnership, intelligence, and training across multiple nations. But behind the language of shared goals lies an assumption that African states need American coordination to prevent collapse. And more than that, without U.S. involvement, their sovereignty is not just fragile, it's dangerous. It's a risk to themselves and American global interests. Here lies the paradox. Langley insists the U.S. won't put boots on the ground, claiming only small deployments for training and idea exchange. Yet the very fact that AFRICOM exists, that it hosts military summits, oversees joint operations, and now critiques how African governments spend gold, proves that U.S. influence is not just present, but deeply entrenched. It's not about how many soldiers are on the ground. It's about who calls the shots in the strategy room.
And what would America, perhaps AFRICOM, be prepared to do? Would you be considering an ouster like we saw with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya? Because there's still many Africans who are yet to recover from that. If this is a bigger threat, as you say, in Burkina Faso, what is AFRICOM prepared to do about it?
We do indications and warnings. There's a number of activities that we do, and we'll just go ahead and mention building institutional capacity. There's not going to be U.S. boots on the ground. Very, very small for exchange of ideas and training, exercises. Over time, that builds institutional capacity and capability in these armies. There, AFRICOM, we are working towards a burden sharing and a burden shift for their independent operations. That's our goal. We have the shared objectives because these same terrorist groups can threaten our homeland.
Here comes the ghost of Libya. When the journalist sharply asked whether AFRICOM could push for an ouster like what happened with Muammar Gaddafi, Langley deflects with vague references to capacity building and institutional partnerships. But the mention of Gaddafi hits hard. That 2011 NATO-led regime change, in which the US played a leading role, left Libya in ruins and remains a trauma across the continent. For many Africans, it's the most brutal reminder of what happens when shared interests become code for regime removal. Langley may not have answered the question, but the memory of Libya answered it for him. What makes this moment so intense isn't just the accusation, it's the silence between Langley's words. He doesn't deny that the US has acted unilaterally in the past. He doesn't say, that won't happen again. He simply says, we're focusing on building capacity. To the African ear, this doesn't sound like reassurance. It sounds like a script perfected by generations of Western officials who claimed to help, but stayed to control. Even Langley's framing of insurgent groups feels selective. He names them all, but never acknowledges how these groups gained traction after years of failed foreign military interventions. There is no introspection, no accountability, only a warning. If Africans don't play ball with AFRICOM, the insurgents win, and so does chaos.
Speaking of that, because the reaction out of the statements that you made about Burkina Faso were several African leaders feeling you are speaking on sovereignty issues that America shouldn't be. And as a result, there are those who see the role of Africa as less of a partner in, the war against, shared threats, as you mentioned, and more of a protector of Western or American economic interests that allows access to Africa's vast mineral resources, and as more of a paternalistic relationship than one of respect amongst peers. What would you respond to that?
I respond that there's others on the globe that do that. There's others on the globe that do that. Now, I'm going to even bring it up. We should have even already know, okay? But I'm going to even bring that up.
Okay.
We respect the sovereignty. We respect their decisions. We respect their decisions of who they choose as a security partner. And then we measure the common denominator that's keeping these countries across the Sahel from progressing forward.
This moment wasn't just a deviation, it was a collision. The journalist questioned whether Langley's presence and AFRICOM's operations reflect a genuine partnership, or whether they embody a paternalistic relationship masquerading as cooperation. He said the quiet part out loud, that for many Africans, America's help comes with invisible handcuffs. It ensures the continent remains accessible, its gold, lithium, uranium, and oil safely within reach of Western companies. Langley's reply? A deflection cloaked in condescension. There are others on the globe that do that too, he muttered, clearly alluding to China and Russia without naming them. It was a classic dodge, one that inadvertently reinforced the journalist's point. By refusing to deny the US's extractive behavior and instead pointing fingers at rivals, Langley confirmed what many in Africa already suspect. Western leaders no longer claim innocence, they just claim competition. It was a subtle but damning admission. In a continent increasingly aware of its value, Langley's response sounded like someone saying, yes, we take from Africa, but at least we're not the only ones. That's not a partnership, that's exploitation with PR. Even more jarring was how he framed AFRICOM's intentions. We respect their sovereignty, we respect their decisions, he repeated, clinging to the line like a drowning man to a rope. But every word now rang hollow, because just moments before he had implied that certain sovereign decisions, like who Burkina Faso partners with or how it spends its gold, were leading to disaster. This is the contradiction the journalist forced into the light. How can you claim to respect African independence while actively warning against African choices? Langley never answered that question. Instead, he pivoted to a shallow defense that the US respects each country's decision in selecting security partners. But by that logic, why criticize Traoré? Why testify against Burkina Faso in front of the US Senate? The contradiction wasn't just visible, it was now. Across the continent, more people are drawing lines between foreign military cooperation and the slow erosion of sovereignty, between joint training exercises and natural resource concessions, between American support and the string-pulling that often follows the handshakes. The journalist's framing of AFRICOM as a potential tool for resource access wasn't conspiratorial. It was historically grounded. From Congo to Niger, from Libya to Mali, the presence of foreign military forces has consistently mirrored the presence of extractive interests. Langley's vague reassurances couldn't erase the truth that Africans know in their bones. Security is the story, but resources are the motive. This is why Langley's explanation failed to land. It wasn't just that his logic was shaky, it was that the lived African experience contradicted it. People have seen what follows these so-called partnerships: drones, surveillance, sudden coups, and puppet leaders who sign contracts no citizen ever voted for. By the time this portion of the interview wrapped, Langley had said a lot, but revealed even more. Not through what he admitted, but through what he avoided. And what the journalist made clear was this: the age of unchallenged American narratives in Africa is over. What do you think about this interview? How do you find these people getting attacked with questions that every African has in their mind? Let us know in the comments section. Do you feel heard? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.